Good day. Okay, so let's get into Shakespeare's Theatre, A Personal Bankside Adventure. The reason it's a personal is because I had the good fortune of being able to go a bankside and to explore and see some of these theaters and check out the Globe Theater. And since this visit in the early 2000s, like 2010s, I have been back and got to see a performance of King Lear at the Globe a couple summers ago. So, yay! So, to get us started, this here is the Swan Theatre, and it was built by Francis Langley about 1594 in the south of Thames, close to the Rose Theatre in Surrey. Scholars disagree as to whether or not Shakespeare and his company at this point, called the Lord Chamberlain's Men from 1564 to 1603 during Queen Elizabeth I's reign. From 1603 to 1616, the troupe was renamed the King's Men when King James I ascended to the throne and became the company's patron. So some scholars disagree as to whether or not Shakespeare and the Lord Chamberlain's Men played at the Swan Theatre. Some argue that the troupe definitely played there from time to time while they were looking for a permanent home, while others will decline that statement. The Swan was one of the largest and most distinguished of all the playhouses, but its place in history is primarily owing to the following two facts. First, it was at the Swan that the acting company Pembroke's Men staged the infamous play The Isle of Dogs, which was responsible for the government's closure of all playhouses in the summer of 1597. And second, the Swan is represented in the only contemporary drawing of the inside of an Elizabethan playhouse known to exist, and that's what you're looking at now. The drawing was created in 1596 by Johannes de Witt, a Dutch traveler who made the sketch while on a trip to London shortly after the Swan Playhouse was built. Remember how we figure out different parts of history and what things look like is by looking at different people's journals, diaries, and written and drawn ideas. The copy pictured here was discovered in Amsterdam in 1880. Anything we can deduce from this drawing of the Swan can most likely be applied to Shakespeare's Globe. The Swan has a rather bleak history after 1597, however, when the staging of plays gave way to a variety of other activities such as amateur poetry readings, swashbuckling competitions, and in 1632 it was declared that the Swan was fallen to decay. The new Swan Theatre exists in London today, that is following after this Swan Theatre. So here's a snapshot of what London looked like and where London theaters could be found in 1600. So this area of modern day or contemporary Suffolk, and it's spelled, it looks like right here, Southwark, but it's pronounced Suffolk. It's associated, this area is associated with more ruckus, vivacious, and unruly behavior. It was also considered the louder, ruder, and more wicked neighbor to London proper, which is over here on this side of the River Thames. And this is London Bridge. We know London Bridge is falling down, and that's how the two are connected, but also people could be ferried across, particularly if you had the extra cash. So over here in County of Surrey and Suffolk, where the bulk of the theaters are, there are a couple that we'll talk about way over here, the Theater and the Curtain and the Fortune, that kind of started over here, but this is where mainly people went to be entertained. This was where the Londoners sought out their entertainment. Think of it, even though it's not as long of a drive, think of it like their Las Vegas. What happens in Suffolk stays in Suffolk. In addition to the theater, Shakespeare contemporaries were familiar with Bankside as an area saturated with sundry and sometimes infamous pastimes such as bear baitings, bull baitings, and brothels. So you can see why the religious folk of the time did not care for people going over to Suffolk or partaking in theater or other sorts of pastimes that were a little bit considered more nefarious than even theater. Audiences could ferry across the Thames to London's South Bank. This would be termed South Bank, with ease and at little to no cost to reach their desired pastimes, or they could walk across the bridge. So the theater up here is London's first public playhouse. It was built in 1576 by an English actor and entrepreneur, James Burbage, who is pretty famous and the father of the great actor and friend of Shakespeare's Richard Burbage. So Richard Burbage plays a lot of Shakespeare characters in Shakespeare's company. It was located in a northern suburb of London, and north of the London Wall, which bounded the city proper. So this is the London Wall, and you can see it's way up here. And it's on the edge of Finsbury Fields, just past Bishopsgate Street, where Shakespeare called home up until 1597. So you can see that happening over here and over here. There are no images of the theater, but written accounts of the building describe a vast, polygonal, three-story timber structure, open to the sun and rain, and its exterior was coated with lime and plaster. The theater was home to many acting companies, but was used primarily by Shakespeare's acting troupe, the Chamberlain's Men, after 1594. Unfortunately, the theater fell victim to government censorship due to the production of Thomas Nash's seditious play, The Isle of Dogs, that I mentioned earlier, that prompted all of London theaters to be closed for the summer of 1597. The theater did not reopen and was dismantled by carpenter Peter Street in 1598. That was the impetus for the Chamberlain's Men, Shakespeare's acting company, to find another home. So the second London playhouse is the Curtain, built in 1577 next to the theater, north of the London Wall, had the same structure as the theater, only slightly smaller, and at times the two were under the same management. Between 1597 and 1598, the Curtain was home of the Lord Chamberlain's Men before they moved to the Globe in 1599. The Globe is down here, that became their permanent home later. The Curtain was used by many popular acting companies after the Lord Chamberlain's Men, including the Queen's Men from 1603 to 1609 and the Prince Charles Company after 1621, but there's no record of the Curtain Theater after 1627. There's really very little information on the Curtain available, but for more details about the owners and profits made by this playhouse, I encourage you to read William Ingram's essay entitled Henry Landman's Curtain Playhouse as an Easer to the Theater, 1585 to 1592, which can be found in a collection of writings called The First Public Playhouse. Here's a fun little thing over here is we've also got the Clink. The Clink is a prison that gives name to all other prisons. The Clink Prison Museum is built on the original site of the Clink Prison, which was one of England's oldest and most notorious prisons, dating back to 1144. It housed debtors, heretics, drunkards, harlots, and religious adversaries. Inmates suffered various levels of torture and torment during their time in the Clink. Just lets you know, kind of almost like Australia, ship off all the ne'er-do-wells to Suffolk, right? The Rose Theatre, which is right here, was built by dyer and businessman Philip Henslow, another well-known person in the theater during this time in 1587. Henslow, an important man of the day, had many impressive titles, including Groom of the Chamber to Queen Elizabeth from the early 1590s, Gentleman Steward to James I from 1603, and Churchwarden and elected vestryman for St. Saviour's Parish from 1608. Henslow built the rose above an old rose garden on Bankside near the south shore of the Thames in Surrey, and the rose property consisted of a plot lying on the corner of Maiden Lane and Rose Alley, an alley about 400 feet long, leading south from the River of Thames into the said parcel of ground, according to Henslow's own papers. By the time Henslow acquired the land lease and began drawing up plans for the Rose, professional playhouses like the Theatre and the Curtain had been open for over a decade. The Rose was round and elegant, solidly composed of brick and timber, and easily accessible, making it more sophisticated than the theatre. After 1592, the Rose seems to have become very popular, and many acting companies performed on its stage, including Lord Strange's Men, probably including Shakespeare as an actor, from 1592 to 93, Sussex Men from 1593 to 94, the Queen's Men in 1594, and the Admiral's Men, Shakespeare's chief rivals, who performed in the Rose for 7 years, starting in the spring of 1594, and the Worcester's Men as late as 1603. During the plague of 1593, the Rose closed down for a time, and nearly 1,100 Londoners succumbed to that plague. It appears that actors from Lord Strange's Men were among those that perished, because when the Rose did reopen, Sussex's Men opened in their place. So what would usually happen is an acting company would kind of be the premier acting company of a given theater during a given time period. And then the director, the actors, the playwright associated with that company would then, those would be the plays that would be performed. So as Shakespeare would be part of the Lord Chamberlain's Men or the King's Men, they would kind of have the rights to Shakespeare's plays, and others would not. So that's sort of how that worked out. The Rose had many successful years, standing as the lone majestic playhouse on on Bankside. But seeing Henslow's success, others wished to share in it, so new theaters were built next to the Rose, which contributed to its ultimate demise. The land lease that Henslow had secured some 31 years before expired in 1605, and then records show that Henslow, although suffering financially due to the competing playhouses, primarily the Globe, was ready to renew his lease under the original terms. The parish from which he was renting insisted on renegotiating the contract, tripling his rent and demanding 100 marks toward the upkeep of the parish. Henslow was livid, replied to the parish, explaining that he would rather pull down the playhouse than do so. So he gave up the Rose in 1605, and it is assumed that it was torn down the following year. Henslow went on to build the Hope Theatre, right here next to the Rose, in 1613. The Hope Theatre was an amphitheater that was located on Bankside in Suffolk, on the side of the Bear Garden, and this is where the first Bear Garden is. And Philip Henslow and Jacob Mead cleared the site and built the Hope Theatre in 1613 to 14. And there is a contract that has survived that describes the structure and the theater and indicates that it was designed after the Swan Theater. So if you look at the Hope, it's similar to what the Swan would have looked like. It had a movable stage to accommodate its dual purpose as a bear baiting ring. And a bear baiting ring is very much like what it sounds like. It's cruelty to bears, but bears would sort of be starved a little bit, and then dogs would come in and be used to get the bear worked up, or people would try to bait the bear into chasing them, and so the bear would usually have a collar or a chain or something of that nature and chase after the humans or the other dogs. So it could be very vicious and violent. And rather inhumane to all of the animals involved. It was agreed that bear baiting would occupy the theater only once every 2 weeks, but the sport proved to be more profitable than the plays. So after Henslow's death in 1616, same year as Shakespeare died, the players left the theater, and although plays were rarely performed thereafter that, bear baiting continued until 1656, when the Hope was closed as a result of several bear baiting accidents. So, and then you can see here where the globe was built. You've got a bull ring. Here's here's the Swan Theater. And what's happening there. Here I am. This is the site of the Rose Theater. And that's when I was able to go and be at the door there. And they have reopened it. It doesn't look exactly like the Rose, but they do hold some plays there. Here's what the Hope and bear baiting. Here's an image of what that looks like. Oops. And you can see sort of how things would be working then. And then let's get to the globe. So why was the globe built? Well, after the theater closed, the Lord Chamberlain's men were homeless or home insecure. They didn't have a home theater, so they needed a home. Without a permanent home, it was difficult to make a living. For as I said earlier, the theaters became homes to the troops. So the more secure the theater or the home, the greater ability these actors and playwrights and directors had to be creative and to express themselves creatively and to perform. So this is an engraving, one of the oldest we have, to let us know what the globe looked like. And you can see it comes much later than when Shakespeare would have been performing his plays. I'm not going to read this to you, but here are some key ideas about the history of the Globe Theater. Built, opened, cannon blast from Henry VIII burnt it down, a part of it down, so then it had to be rebuilt. Then it was closed down because of puritanical reign and rule, and that the theater was considered to be sinful and provide too much temptation, and was sordid and morally corrupt. And then it actually took an American, Sam Wanamaker, to come and say, guess what? This is so important. We need to build a replica globe. And in fact, it is built around the corner, approximately 750 feet from the site of the original. The site of the original has a bunch of condos on it. And then the theater, the New Globe Theater opened in 1994. What's pretty special about this is that Wanamaker, many of the tradespeople and the type of building that took place in Tudor England and with the Tudor style of architecture, many of the tradesfolk handed down their craftsmanship through the generations. So Wanamaker, there's no metal or screws or bolts in the Globe Theater. It was built after the fashion of the original Globe, and using timber and resources from across the country and the countryside to make that happen. So it's pretty special. Here's a little monument that is on a little gate outside of the condos where the original Globe would have stood. And you better believe I gave that little Shakespeare a little kissy that was before COVID. And then here's the courtyard. It was raining this day, but the courtyard, and it just says the Globe inside of that little sort of, it's larger than a plaque, but you might call it a plaque. And then that's what it looks like. And there are the condos, and there's are some information you can read. And then that little archway is right in there, and you can walk behind that and see it. So, it was originally 3 stories, and held 3,000 people. He owned about 12% of the theater, and we already saw where it was located. This is what it looks like now, and you can see how beautifully crafted and the architecture is. This is the hay sort of, or straw roof, and it's pretty special. The entrance view, so prices of admission depended on the kind of theater it was. Outdoor theaters like the Globe charged in the early days 1 penny to get in, and another penny if you wanted to sit in the balcony. A penny equals about $1.66, maybe a little bit more now. Other equivalents are also in current US dollars. By the early 17th century, they probably charged a flat 6 pence, which would be about $10 to get in. Admission to the private indoor theaters, which catered to a more affluent audience, generally began at a basic 6 pence to gain entry into the galleries, and then fancy gallants who wanted to be seen, however, could sit on the stage for 2 shillings or $40, and a box could be had for a half a crown, which would be $50. So you can see how it starts here, and this is open and exposed to the elements, and then this would be secured. You're still open to it, but not underneath it if it starts to rain or anything. And look how excited I am going into the Globe Theater for the first time in my life ever. It was incredible. So the floor view, financially challenged people, the poor, the socioeconomically challenged people could get into the plays for little money, but they had to stand. They were called the groundlings because they were on the ground, but many of them would lean up against the stage there. So theater was much more raucous an event than we see today. People have this idea that theater is hoity-toity and for the fancy. It was for everybody, and it still is. I think it's been sort of bogarted by the wealthy and elite, but it's not just for them. And there would be a lot of interaction, and we'll talk more about that. It would be very difficult to see unless you were right next to the stage, depending upon where you're standing. And plays often lasted 4 to 6 hours, and groundlings would stand the whole time. So My Kingdom for a Stool, they want to sit down, they get tired, right? This is a little bit like El Ringue here with this picture, but I want to just look past her because this is what the stage looks like. And they really tried to fashion it after what Shakespeare would have used during his time. And so what you can see, it was starting to hail here, actually. I was here in December during the winter. There would be, there's some drawings up here. This is the balcony scene for the famous balcony, Romeo and Juliet. There would be these windows and doors would open up so people could come out. There would be trapdoors here where people could be lowered down. There's space under here for actors to sit, and then they could rise up through the floor for to allow for some of the magic and wonder of some of the different plays. And then they would come in through these doors here as well. And they, like I said, they would be open and people would be standing here and leaning right on here. For the second and third floor, then you've got the middle to upper class folks sitting there. It wraps around. It's like a theater in the round almost, but not exactly. It's because it's got the three different sides. And only the upper class folks could be on the third level, and it would cost extra money for them to get a padded seat. So think about the actors and what they had to deal with during this time. They had many distractions. The weather, there's no roof. A rowdy audience, they're not going to sit in silence. And they will talk back to the actors. And so it's a little bit more like improv in addition to your regularly memorized lines. The other thing is everybody came with their own fruit and vegetable sort of store, because if there was bad acting or if they weren't entertaining enough, they would be booed, and they would be booed off the stage, and rotten fruits and vegetables would be thrown at them. This is another image. Would be something maybe at the Tempest, during the Tempest, that would be used when there are gods in the play, to show sort of the heavenly sort of things happening, and so you can sort of get a different view. And that's all for now. All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. A famous quote from As You Like It. This is such a fun picture because here I'm at Shakespeare's house. This wasn't his house. This was, no, this is his birthplace. I'm sorry. And this was not planned. I literally was just walking and was so excited, jumped up to kick my heels, and my husband just happened to catch it. So yay! I hope you're kicking up your heels after this Bankside adventure, and I hope you enjoy the plays as we continue to work through them. Cheers!